Hi, everybody. Today we're going to look at the interview of CNN with Vice President candidate JD Vance. This was recently aired and it's really interesting. Now, in this video, I'm going to look at some of the psychological aspects of such an interview. And elections are really, really exciting. And there are things you can pick up that tell you something about the people if you look at the way they talk, like their expressions and their personality. And I believe that personality, something that I teach and that I investigate, I think personality is really important in elections, even though politicians sometimes themselves say "Oh, it's all about personalities, but we're really about substance." Yes, substance matters, but personality, I think, matters a lot too, because it's about how an individual voter connects to someone. Do we recognize ourselves, or do we think if we watch someone who's speaking, does that person recognize maybe our issues, the issues that we care about as voters? Now, I have lived a long time in the United States. I believe I understand the US system quite well, and I also love following the US news. You could argue many people in the world do. So let's go have a look at it. And I start from the beginning because I think from the beginning on, it's quite interesting. Okay, let's go.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, Senator.
Thank
so
you.
within a week of you being named on the VP ticket, the Democratic nominee changed. And you guys seem to be struggling a little bit with how to approach the new dynamic. How are you approaching your new opponent and the new ticket?
Yeah.
This is actually really interesting, right? So just to summarize her question, so she says, you seem to be struggling. So basically she says two things. So your opponent's ticket changed, right? So we have now candidate Harris and their vice president candidate Walz. And her question is, so you're struggling. They changed. They're struggling. So how do you deal with this? And then look at the response. Now, first of all, here actually, when we look at this, we see his face is sort of like smiling. He's sitting forward and he also sits with his hands clutched. Now, so this is a position which people would say not fully relaxed. This is, interviews are really challenging because you have this, you don't know what questions are coming. So you can, as a candidate here, you can prepare for certain things. So you will have trained with your team on, okay, these are the things that I want to communicate. This is what I'm going to say, and you will see how he's going to do that. But so the question is, this actually is a difficult question because she puts him in a defensive position because she says something negative about JD Vance, and Trump says you're in trouble, so you're struggling. So that is so if somebody says something negative to you, you immediately go, yeah, okay, and then so that's, I think, part of what explains the position. So now let's see what he says.
Well, I think it's pretty straightforward, actually. We're running against a set of policies that I think have failed the American people, and we're running to a set of policies, President Trump's 4 years in office, that I think really succeeded for the American people. And I think that what's different about it, and you're right, Dana, it is different, but what's different about it is that.
Now, see what he does there. He says, "You're right, Dana. It's different." Now, that's sort of like just a filler, right? Because but he does something there. So first of all, so it is about he uses her name, her first name. So he tries to sort of like connect with the interviewer, try to say, well, like, I know you, I can talk on your level. So that is a common technique that almost all politicians do. Then what you also see here is that he just says, yeah, you're right, it's different. Yeah, obviously that's not the question. The question is why you're struggling. And is he answering that? Well, of course, people try not to answer difficult questions. I mean, all politicians do that. I mean, some might do that, but let's see if he tries to do that.
We're running against a different person who a lot of Americans just don't know.
So now this is a funny answer in many ways. He says, we're running against a person, many people don't know. Now, if you think about analyze that for a moment, if that is the case, then why is the Trump campaign struggling? If is that a reason to struggle? I mean, normally that's actually a benefit because if you have a complete unknown as your opponent, then people would say, well, I'm not going to vote to this for this person I don't know at all. I'm going to vote for I'm going to vote for Trump and JD Vance. But so that cannot really be the explanation. So, but he tries to say, well, but this is something I think that he just pre-prepared right before the question. This is something he wanted to say. He wanted to say this is a person people don't know, and you see that throughout the interview. So they're trying to say negative things about the opponents.
And so I think we have to remind people that President Trump delivered lower prices, lower inflation, a prosperous and peaceful world.
Now, again, this is something that I think he has prepared. He wants to say, well, we need to remind people, we need to remind people that, in his opinion, and it's fair enough. If that's his opinion, then that's fine. We need to remind people how good things were under Trump. Now, different people will have a different memory of that, but again, it doesn't address the question that she asked, why are you struggling?
And also a secure border, and Kamala Harris's policies have produced the exact opposite. Now, that was an easier case to make when Joe Biden was in there because people associate Joe Biden with the policies, but I think Kamala Harris clearly owns the policies of the Biden-Harris administration, especially when we consider the fact that, as we've all learned over the last few months, Joe Biden clearly isn't capable of doing the job, and so I think that drives home that Kamala Harris really has been the one calling the shots. I mean, how could she not? I think Joe Biden doesn't really know where he is.
Kamala Harris has been calling the shots. As who?
Well, I think she has to have been, right? Because if she's not calling the shots, Dana, then who is? And I do.
Now, again, so far, in my opinion, he has not really addressed the question.
I think it drives home something that's fundamentally dishonest about the way that Vice President Harris and also a lot of senior Democrats have approached this. If you remember, for months, even years, the argument was that Joe Biden was sharp, he could clearly do the job, and the minute that he performed poorly in that debate and he became political dead weight, you have Kamala Harris and everybody else trying to throw him overboard. But I think the more troubling question is, why did so many senior Democrats, including the vice president, cover for him? And if Joe Biden wasn't capable of doing the job, as even a lot of Democrats say now, was Kamala Harris in charge or was somebody else in charge? And that's a real issue.
So basically, he turns around the tables, basically. And that is a technique.
No evidence that Kamala Harris threw him overboard. But I want to move on to something that Governor Walz has called you and Donald Trump, and that is weird.
Sure.
Now, this is an interesting point here because this has been in the news a lot, and I think people have said this is a really good strategy of the Harris-Walz campaign to basically say, you guys are weird. So this is psychologically, if you think about it, this is an attack, you could argue, not so much on substance, and this is again interesting psychologically. To say that somebody is weird is basically almost a Trumpian, I would say, attack. It goes on the person rather than on the substance. Funny thing here is, and this is the psychological aspect, is he is laughing about it. And what this means something, right? So his laugh basically says to us, or what he wants to communicate with this here, possibly at an unconscious level, is, oh, well, don't take that seriously, right? So he wants to basically dismiss that. But you could argue, but let's go then to the substance of what is meant with weird. And let's see if the interviewer drills down on that, because that would be a good thing. And I think later she does that. And we come especially on things as well, such as the comments about cat women.
And it is taken off. The New York Times reports that when Donald Trump was asked about it, he said, not me, they're talking about JD.
And again, his response here, now unfortunately we don't see his whole body, so we have the facial shot, and ideally I would say in these interviews you see the whole body. And actually I think this is exactly why town hall meetings with election candidates are important, because the voters, the people, they can see the candidates as a whole and not just a snapshot of it, in this case the face. But the face tells you a lot here. He laughs it off. I mean, that is a strategy, so you can laugh off something. It is, because what other strategies you could have three strategies here, three psychological strategies. So one is to laugh it off. Oh, don't take that seriously, right? So that's one strategy. The second strategy would be one where you would be angry. Oh, how dare they say that? And that is maybe not so good, right? Because that just shows that you are actually hurt by it, and that would not be a good strategy. So and the third strategy would just be to ignore it and just talk over it. And let's see what he does then after he laughs.
Well, certainly they've levied that charge against me more than anybody else, but I think that it drives home how they're trying to distract from their own policy failures. I mean, look.
Now, what is interesting here, and to some degree, you could say, I think this is probably a good argument to make. It's a sensible argument to say, well, look, it is just a distraction. But let's face it, that is what it is. It is a distraction. As soon as you criticize people's personality or people's hair color or the body size or whatever, right? So that's it's I would argue almost it's not worthy of certainly of people in the very high office to do that. Although people will do it, but so it is he I think responds here in the right way to this. So I think he makes the right move.
This is fundamentally schoolyard bully stuff. They can accuse me of whatever they want to accuse me of.
Again, he says it's schoolyard bully stuff, and I think he's right to say that. I mean, that is, I would say, this is a good response to this. It's a smart reply.
As Harry S. Truman once said, if you can't take the heat, stay out of the kitchen. And I'm doing this because I think that me being vice president will help improve people's lives. So I accept their attacks, but I think that it is a little bit of projection, Dana. If you think about,
Now he says it's projection. Now projection is a psychological term. So what he means here is they are actually weird.
just take a couple of days ago. Tim Walz gives this big speech. He's been announced as the VP nominee.
And now he is going to give you, and watch this, he's going to give you an example of why Tim Walz is weird.
And I remember when I had just been announced as the VP nominee, I gave my big speech and I saw my wife and I gave her a big hug and a kiss because I love my wife and I think that's what a normal person does. Tim Walz gave his wife a nice, firm Midwestern handshake and then tried to sort of awkwardly correct for it. So I think that what it is two people, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, who aren't comfortable in their own skin because they aren't comfortable with their policy positions for the American people. And so they're name calling instead of actually telling the American people how they're going to make their lives better. I think that's weird, Dana, but look, they can call me whatever they want to.
You're saying Tim Walz doesn't have affection for his wife? I don't even understand that.
I said
Now, if you think about it, it is, she says, I don't understand it. And I can see why she says that. So this is, how the argument is built up. And it is, it's, so because he draws conclusions. So he tries to do something here. He says, Waltz is weird because he didn't hug and kiss his wife like I do because I love my wife. And therefore he concludes from that Waltz doesn't love his wife, which is, it's a strange conclusion. It's an indirect conclusion. But, she goes, she asks him about it. So why do you say that?
that he acted weird, which he did, on a
So, and it comes back to weird. That's what he talk about.
national stage in front of his wife and in front of millions of Americans who presumably were watching at home. And I think that it's projection, Dana. Look, I think this election should be about who's going to solve the inflation crisis, who's going to make groceries and housing more affordable, who's going to secure that southern border. Kamala Harris's record is that she supported all of the policies that made that problem worse, Dana. We're trying to say we're going to take the country in a different direction. I really think that it's important to point this out, Dana. Their entire campaign has not been about here's our policy for how we're going to make your life better, or here's what's wrong with Donald Trump and JD Vance's policies. We're going to name call and hope that you don't notice that we don't have an agenda. That is the entire Democrat approach to this election.
Now, this is interesting, actually. I think there is an interesting thing about this. So, JD Vance accuses the Democrats here, his opponents, of name calling, which I think is justified, given that they have called him weird and Trump said, oh, they're not talking about me, they're talking about JD. So JD was really, I feel he has been attacked, so he's trying to do something against that, and he came up with one example where he said, well, look, Tim Walz is weird. So, and then he says it's projection, so they're projecting because their whole campaign is about name calling. But that is actually who is doing the projection here, because traditionally, I would argue, it is actually, and I have another video about that, it's typically Trump who does, so like, the name calling, so like, making fun of people. He has done that quite a bit with Joe Biden, for example. So it is, uh, what sometimes people would say that's a Trumpian behavior almost. Very interesting to see that the tables are turned, and you know that's fascinating in many ways from a psychological point of view. And I think that's actually why they're struggling.
They have done both. They have both policies, and they are trying to define you
Dana,
as well.
if you go, no, if you go to Kamala Harris's campaign page right now, they still don't have a policy.
Well, let's talk about
policy
policy
positions
versus
about what they're going to do. I think that's really insulting to Americans.
you started.
Now that is also interesting. Look what he does here. He says it's insulting to Americans, and that is, well, first of all, it's name calling. So, which he just accuses his opponents of. But like I think we as people who analyze these things is we need to realize that politicians are often more similar to one another than you think. They come from the sort of like the same sphere of working. They have similar techniques. They have the same sort of like structure in their campaigns. They will have similar training techniques that they focus on. So often you see similarities in how these people work. And I would argue that like ultimately that is not so interesting. But I think it is interesting that he used a term like dishonesty. Now, let's see what she says.
Out talking about the policies
Please.
in this interview, but you have been on the campaign trail questioning Tim Walz's military record. You say it was shameful that Governor Walz retired from the military.
Now, so she says, okay, so you said he was shameful. Again, a form of name calling, arguably.
Before his unit deployed to Iraq. I want to read you something that Joe Eustace, who is a veteran, he served
Sure.
with Governor Walz, said. He said that's a lie. He said he was as good a soldier as you'll find. I'm not trying to defend him. I hope people don't think that. What I'm trying to do is defend someone who served his country. I'm not voting for him. I'll campaign against him, but I don't think it's fair to.
Now, also what's interesting here, we don't see his whole body. He's listening to something that is really not good for him, but he still keeps smiling. I find that is quite interesting. And that is probably sort of like a defense mechanism. So despite the challenge that, he could look, if he would look sad now, you would understand it because you say, somebody is not saying nice things about you, just still smiling. So now remember, like, there are people like me, like making videos about this. They know that people take cuts from these sort of interviews, and that's all the time over social media. So they've also learned on how to behave, I think. So and we see that later in the interview in a far more fascinating way.
Characterize his service the way they have. Governor Walz served 24 years.
Sure.
He even stayed after he could have retired because of 9/11.
Now look, now you see his whole body position here, and I find that interesting. So what you see here is he sits somewhat forward, uh, with his hands so like held together. So I think he this is an important interview for him. He's new on the scene, and I think he knows he is in a difficult situation. Just given that he, not just because they're difficult questions, but because of the situation, the context is difficult for him. He has been criticized. He is in an interview, and I think that is actually a good thing that politicians you should applaud them for this, going out and doing interviews with the press. These are not scripted. But you can see he is not entirely comfortable.
More than the country asked of him. Do you honor his service?
Well, of course, Dana, I honor his service, and I've never criticized what Tim Walz did.
This is interesting, right? So because he has criticized Tim Walz basically for leaving the military early, which others have said that is not a fair argument because he was fully entitled to retire already for a long time. So this is a weak attack. It looks like they're trying to find something. You can look, for example, at the interview, I think also on CNN with Jesse Ventura, who explains this really well. What's interesting is, of course, in America, there are certain things that are really important, such as service to your country, like being in the military. I mean, I would say in America that is really, really important. Certainly in the UK, I would say, for example, it's important, or in some other countries, it's important, but in the US, it is. I think in elections, it is something that people it's people talk about it, that is something the best almost you can do because you're sacrificing yourself, and I think that is fair enough given that America has been in wars, so it's a risk to be in the military. That's one of these issues. And other issues, really, these key issues are things such as gun control and abortion, and these things might come up later as well. But so first he wants to say, no, of course, I know this is really important. And by the way, Vance himself has, of course, been in the military. So he has to say something positive about it. Unlike Trump, in a way, so Trump has not been in the military. Something that comes up in the interview later, and then we will see what he says about that.
When he was in the military, I criticized his retirement decision. And most importantly, Dana, I criticized his lying about his own record, okay? This is a guy who was captured on video saying, I carried a gun in war. He never went to war. This is a guy who's been captured on video. As other people say, he's an Afghanistan veteran. He's a veteran of a war, nodding along in agreement instead of saying, no, 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 I did serve my country and I did it honorably, but I never went to a war zone. I'm not criticizing Tim Walz's service. I'm criticizing the fact that he lied about his service for political gain, Dana. Now, I served in the United States Marine Corps, and you know this. And look,
so he wants to point out, I served, right? So very important for the voters. Personally, I don't find this whole argument so interesting because if you look at the videos of Tim Walz, I don't think that it's fair to say that Tim Walz tried to mislead people about that. So I would say this is not the most interesting part of the interview, but I think it is something that what happens with these interviews, they have prepared that, and he has worked hard on preparing himself he wanted to put us in somewhere, and he did, and he had a great chance here.
there are a lot of things that I'm proud about. I've never lied about what I did or overstated it because it would be beneficial to me in an election. I think that's what Tim Walz did. That's what I was criticizing. And yes, I do think it's scandalous behavior.
You talked about one of the things that he said, weapons of war. He was talking in a campaign stop about,
Yeah.
he was trying to talk about gun control.
Sure.
And he said, weapons of war I carried in war. I will say that the Harris-Walz campaign did say that the governor misspoke there.
And you can see that, you can look that clip on, and I wouldn't make much of it. I mean, if you see that clip, yeah, I mean, like it was just like because he was saying something, and it's sort of like it came out like that. I mean, I think we need to be fair to Tim Walz there. Uh, I think when you analyze these things psychologically, you need to realize two things, right? So these people, they want power. Both parties want that, and I think you need to try not to see it. Okay, which one do I like personally? But you need to try to sort of like be neutral and try to say how they make the arguments and also, of course, how they try to influence the audience. And that is what really important here. I mean, I think there was no deliberate lie here, but here we see a way of where JD Vance is trying to inflate the issue. So, sort of like you could say that's sort of like an exaggeration. Use an exaggeration technique and say it's lying, they're lying, they need to lie, otherwise they don't win the election. So that's sort of like his technique here, and he does that, and he keeps going back on it quite a bit.
Sure.
Do you accept that?
He misspoke. Another word is that he lied about it.
And then he says, yeah, so he misspoke, and that means he lied about it. Now, technically, legally, probably misspeak. Well, it's, from a psychological point of view, misspeaking and lying are two completely different things. If people make mistakes, right? If you talk a lot, especially as a politician, and you're in the media all the time, sometimes sometimes you might misremember something, or you don't know whether you met somebody specifically. So I think we need to be understanding of that can happen. We're all human beings. These are human beings. I think misspeaking is completely different from a deliberate lie. But he's making an argument here. Says if you misspeak, you lie, which is a strange argument to make. I think, and I don't think that unless you're already in the camp of Trump and JD Vance, then you say, oh yeah, of course they lie. But if you're sort of like an undecided voter, I don't think that this is going to convince you.
And he didn't correct the record for 15 years until he was put under political pressure because I called it out, Dana. Whatever you want to call it, a misspeaking or a lie, I think Tim Walz should have to correct the record. Now, you pointed out a soldier.
Now he said Tim Walz has to correct the record. Well, he did. I mean, they said that he misspoke. So again, I mean, this is here he is just using. He takes time in the interview to sort of like exaggerate that, and I think it's not the most interesting part of the interview, because what he is doing, you know you can think about it differently, right? So one way to say it is, well, look, fair enough, he wants to make the most of it because maybe they don't have that much to go on, and what people will do, what the campaigns will do, they will try to find any fault in the opponents, and then you can use that. The question is, how far do you want to go with it, and at what point does it not convince people anymore? And I think this is one where you're not going to win the campaign on keep going on saying that the other party is lying. I must say though, the Democrats do that a lot. I mean, so like the idea, we saw that after I think the debate between Trump and Biden, where Jill Biden said, we know that Trump is a liar.
Let me ask the crowd, what did Trump do? Lie!
So again, I mean, they use the same technique here. They say the other party is lying, and in a way, um, you know, you can ask yourself, how convincing is that? Does that convince you? I mean, generally, what you also see a lot here, and what you see, I would say, in both campaigns, is that they what they do a lot is talk bad about the other party rather than say, this is what we do. We are great because we are going to do these things. I personally think, from a voter's point of view, that's probably a better thing. If you want to convince people to vote for you, you would say, well, if you vote for us, this is what we're going to do for you. All right, great. But what they do instead is, if you vote for the other party, these are all the terrible things that are going to happen to you because you voted for the wrong party. I think that is just psychologically, that is, it's sort of like a negative motivation. So, and you try to set people up for that. But maybe currently that is all they have. That's all they can do. And let's see to what degree the Democrats are going to be different on that. And I will be looking forward to see that.
who defended his service. There have been a number of soldiers who served with Tim Walz who have criticized him on the exact same grounds that I have, because it's not right to misstate or to embellish what you've done, and I think that's what he did.
And on the question of when he left the National Guard, he filed his election paperwork February 10th, 2005. That was a month before the National Guard even announced that it was possible that they would deploy to Iraq, and it ended up being 2 months. He retired 2 months before they actually got the paperwork.
But on CNN last night, Dana, one of the people who was actually in charge of him said they knew they were going to deploy to Iraq in February of 2004, fall of 2004. So he knew he was going to Iraq. He decided to quit, to retire, whatever word you want to use.
Retire.
Because he wanted to run for Congress. He lied about that. He said that.
Now, so what you see here, again, he lied about that. So what they want to do here is he want to portray Tim Walz as a liar.
When he decided to retire, he did not know that he was going to Iraq. That is another untruth, as even his senior military officer said. So again, I'm not criticizing the service. I'm criticizing the dishonesty. Dishonesty spoken in.
And you see here, you can see it behind the text of the CNN screen, how he goes on like, oh, this. So he stresses the point that he wants to make here. I think what that means is that in the training that they did before this interview, they have told him many times, like, our strategy is this, right? So you can imagine how they said, our strategy is this. We are going to portray Walz and Harris as liars. Now, that's no different. That's no different from, of course, what the Democrats have been doing as well. So they copy each other, and I think that's interesting. Like that, you see these parties, they to some degree they copy each other. They see that works in the other party, so we are going to do the same.
Favor and for the purpose of political benefit. And I think that the most important thing here, Dana, is it goes to Kamala Harris's judgment. Tim Walz is ultimately going to be the vice president. Kamala Harris is in great health. I'm sure she's going to be president if she wins for 4 or maybe even 8 years. Why did Kamala Harris choose a person who has lied about their military service? I think that is a serious lapse in judgment. And I don't want to hear from a campaign spokesperson of Kamala Harris. I want to hear Kamala Harris herself address what I just said.
You know, I've seen a lot of statements from veterans, including those you served with, saying it's just untoward to be criticizing somebody who served for 24 years.
Now, this is interesting, and I think this is, as I say, within society, people who have served in the military have a high status. This is a high status thing. And the argument she makes is, and it's a direct criticism of him, and see how he responds to that. So she says basically, she says other people have said, but indirectly she communicates this. It's untoward to do this. This man has served for so long. How can you possibly criticize him? Now, I personally think a lot of that is made in this interview. A lot of time is spent on this. And fair enough. So that's probably in their interview preparation. They've said, well, Vance criticized Walz for his military record, so we're going to ask some questions about it. But what she does here, rather than going, I would say, on the substance, she goes also on you could say, the morality behind it. So, and this is interesting from a psychological point of view, is because the question that is really behind this psychologically is this: is JD Vance a moral person or not? How dare someone criticize somebody with a military service? In the eye of the American public, that is something very low. So are you there, or what do you have to say for yourself? That's basically her question, and let's see how he addresses that.
Dana, I'm not interested in the ad hominem. I've heard.
Well, that's interesting. So then he says, Dana, right? So personal. Dana, I'm not interested in the ad hominem. So in the sort of like the direct attack of the person.
from a lot of veterans groups who criticize Tim Walz. The question is, he said he served in war.
And then he goes back to this. It's not about the services. It's about the lying about it. Now, arguably, I think the weak point here in the argument is, was there a lie in the first place? And I think that's ultimately what this whole argument hangs on. But what psychologically happens, and this is an interesting thing, analytically, you could say, well, Walz didn't really lie. He misspoke, but that it didn't. I don't think you can make that say that there's a deliberate lie. And given that that didn't happen, the whole argument doesn't make sense. But the idea here is a little bit just repeating that somebody lies in the hope that some of that will stick with voters.
And he didn't. That is a dishonesty. I couldn't care less what one or the other person says about it. I care about what the truth is. The truth is that Tim Walz didn't tell the truth. And
That's interesting thing. The truth is that Tim Walz didn't tell the truth.
importantly, Dana, this is about Kamala Harris's judgment. And I think that when you ask, why has Kamala Harris allowed the border to be wide open? Why has Kamala Harris supported policies that have promoted the increase in inflation? I think it goes to the heart of her judgment, and I think that that's what we should be talking about.
One last question. Donald Trump didn't serve in the military. He received a medical draft deferment for bone spurs to avoid serving in the Vietnam War, reportedly as a favor to his father. Do you find that shameful, too?
I think that Donald Trump didn't serve in the military, but he didn't lie about it, Dana. I've known
And so it is. Of course, this is a good question because Trump didn't serve. And if you see other interviews, people will have argued, well, Trump just got out because he could pay for it, sort of like you see that's the argument that, again, Jesse Ventura made in the interview that was just this also, I think, broadcast last week. And now JD Vance, ideally Trump would have served, right? And JD Vance could say, yeah, see, Trump served, but unfortunately he didn't. But then he said, yeah, but that it doesn't really matter because I'm not so much focused on the service, but I'm focused on the lying about it. And Trump didn't lie.
Donald Trump for a long time. He really honors our veterans. He honors me for my service. Donald Trump didn't lie about serving in the military. He didn't.
Now, C says, do you think that he had this, disease that got him out of the draft? And JD Vance doesn't want to go into that.
Say that he went to Vietnam when he didn't. This is the problem. I don't criticize anybody. Whether they served our country or not, I think it's honorable to serve, but obviously a lot of people have reasons for not serving. I criticize somebody for embellishing their record, for lying, saying, I went to war. Dana, do you think that it's a problem that he said, I went to war, but he didn't actually? That seems to be a problem to me.
Well,
that criticizing someone for misspeaking about his service, I don't know. I don't think it is something that is going to convince the undecided voter on this one. I mean, I think this took a long part of this was actually quite a big part of the interview. His point is clear, and I think sort of like well communicated, but I don't think it is going to be a game-changing argument.
They've corrected that. Let's move on to.
They've corrected it by admitting that
Let's move on to another important issue to voters, and that is the issue of abortion. A real question, a substantive question, hasn't made it to the Supreme Court. So my question for you is whether or not a Trump-Vance administration would allow mifepristone to continue to be sent around the country.
Now, this is, of course, a really important question because abortion is in every election cycle. It's a big issue. It's a big, big discussion point in the United States, and let's see how he answers this question. So the question is, are you going to allow women to have access to this drug? And it's a yes or no question, but you can see he doesn't want to answer it directly. So they're going to say, well, it's not really it's not really something that we can decide on.
President Trump won the nomination of the Republican Party. He said it to you, and he said it repeatedly, that his goal is not to block mifepristone, it's to let states make the decision on abortion policy.
So basically, the argument here is, look, it doesn't really matter. Let the states decide, right? So this is a way, from a psychological point of view, to say, well, look, you can ask me all sorts of questions, but unfortunately, he doesn't even say that. I think it's just the states that should decide. So it's not even something that I have anything to do with. It's the states, and that is a way for him to evade the problem. So here you have a matter of evasion. So sometimes if you have a difficult situation, so he is in a difficult situation because he is defending his record. He knows he has a very mixed audience. There will be people who are pro and pro-abortion, or pro-choice, I should say. So the thing is here, the people are pro-choice, and there are people who want these drugs banned. And he says, well, sorry, can't really say much about it because it's the states that are going to decide.
Now, of course, that does mean, Dana, we have to be honest about this, that California might have less restrictive rules than Ohio, which might have less restrictive rules than Alabama. I think what President Trump is really trying to do on the abortion question is really admirable, and I wish the
Now, he says it's admirable. I mean, here again, a positive trait, ascribing a positive trait to your own campaign and ascribing negative traits to the other campaign. It's very simple psychology, but does it work? I'm not sure. It works if you already support a team, but I think if you're an undecided voter, maybe not so much.
The press was a little bit more honest about it. He's saying we've had a 50-year culture war over abortion, where unfortunately this issue has just divided the country, and he wants to provide some ground for us to come together, for states to make these decisions, for voters to make these decisions, and for us all to respect one another. That's all he's
on
proposed.
that issue, a few months ago, on the question.
And what's coming now, I think, and I've watched this interview multiple times, and I think this is really an interesting part. So watch this.
His position,
Yeah.
which you've adopted, is it is up to the states. I spoke to a woman named Kate Cox. She lives in Texas.
Sure.
She was 20
Now, see, he says, sure. She says, so there's this woman, Kate Cox. Now, later he will say he already knows this story. But look at his face when she says this.
weeks pregnant. Her fetus was diagnosed with a disease it was a deadly genetic condition called trisomy 18. She said that carrying the pregnancy, she was told this by her doctors, to term, if the fetus even survived, would hurt her chances for having more children, which she and her husband desperately wanted.
Now, look at him. While she tells him basically this tragic story, which is really, really a tragic story, what do you see in his face? This is interesting. So that this is sort of like, you could argue this is a mask. Because he has a smile on his face. Is he looking sad somewhere else? That's such a sad story. No, he actually has a smile. And I wonder why that is. Now, I think that is sort of like a protective mechanism here. He knows it's going to be, because he already knows what the question is going to be. So he knows it's tough. And I think he cannot possibly give a good answer to it. So he is hiding that. And he does that by basically putting on a smiling mask. But internally, I think he knows, I don't like that question. And besides that, anyone who listens to that question knows, this is actually a really tragic story. So what's going on here? Let's continue.
Why is not allowing her to end that pregnancy helpful or supportive of expanding families like you want it to be?
Well, first of all, Dana, my heart breaks for this woman. I don't know her personally. I've certainly heard the story, and our heart.
Now, what is interesting? So, and if we just skip back a little bit, right? So, let's play that one more time.
Of expanding families like you want it to be.
Well, first of all, Dana, my heart breaks for this woman. I don't know her personally. I've certainly.
Now he says, my heart breaks for this woman. So this is the moment where he shows the emotion. It's almost as if he has been waiting for this. What I find interesting is during the question, yeah, hearing, yeah, directly the tragic story, sort of like putting up sort of like a smile, but then when he's triggered to give an answer, oh yeah, it's a horrible story. There is sort of like a delay in that, and to me, it suggests that you know, to some degree, he knows. He's. I think he's an intelligent person. He knows he has to show compassion, and he does that in word, and then you see it sort of like comes out. But it doesn't come out at the moment that I would have expected to come out, and that makes me wonder. I noticed that I've watched this multiple times. I find it interesting. Now, you know, uh, I think you know, putting up there's this phrase, right? Putting up a brave face, right? So that's what people do when they are being challenged, and I think that's what we saw there.
Heard the story and our heart breaks for her, and we want people to have healthy, happy families, and it's extremely unfortunate that sometimes, medicine, the act of God, whatever happens, it just doesn't work out. And what the president has said, I think, very clearly is that he is not trying to prevent women who have non-viable pregnancies from getting access to the medical care that they need.
But allowing the states to decide, a place like Texas, which has very strict laws now, doesn't allow a Kate Cox to end a pregnancy that is fatal and could potentially hurt her ability to have more kids.
But what President Trump has said is that we are going to let voters make these decisions. And again, Texas might have a view that President Trump disagrees with. They might have a view that President Trump agrees with, but you've got to let the voters make these decisions.
So you're comfortable with that law in Texas?
I'm not comfortable with anything, Dan.
Now, this is a very strange argument. I'm not comfortable with anything. What is he saying here? I mean, I found this was a really awkward situation. It actually, you know, he has an opportunity here to say what he really thinks, and he doesn't. And what it showed to me is that he said, well, he basically what he says. I think it is again, it's pure psychology, right? He said, well, I don't think anything. He does because what it means is what he is actually saying is, I don't want to give you an answer to this question. I don't care. I don't want to talk about this. And that's also he takes these hands out. These blocking hands, right? So uh, I keep this away from me. This question. I don't want to answer it.
Because I'm not passing judgment on what these laws should be. You ask me my own personal view. I campaigned against an Ohio referendum, but I think that we have to let voters decide. And when they speak their mind, you have to be respectful. Agree or disagree with whatever voters decide, they're going to make these decisions.
Yeah, but again, I mean, as I say, I mean, this is not a strong argument because yes, voters will decide. I mean, obviously, that happens in democracy. So that is not new information. But what the voters expect is that the politicians say what they think so that they know what they have to vote on. But basically, what they want to say, what they do here is basically, well, it's not up to us as the sort of like the top team in the country. We're about, I guess, foreign policy, economics, but not about this is sort of like a state issue.
One of them, Carol Carty, said she was almost a childless dog lady because she didn't happen to meet the right person until she was 40 years old.
Now, this is, of course, really difficult. Again, an interesting part of the interview, I think, because this goes back to a comment that he made in the past, which he later calls in the interview a sarcastic comment. But look at his body language at this moment. It's nice. I'll play this shortly again while we're seeing this. Okay.
Of course,
one of them, Carol Carty, said she was almost a childless dog lady because she didn't.
You see how he pulls his hands back a little bit. He is, I think, this is uncomfortable for him. He's having sort of like this smile on his face, has his hands clenched. He knows this is an uncomfortable, difficult question. He also knows he has to address it because it's of course it has been this issue has been he has been criticized for this a lot in the media, and he needs to defend himself. And let's see how he does that.
Happened to meet the right person until she was 40 years old. Another, Joan London, was offended that you don't think she has a stake in the future of the country because she doesn't have children. What do you say to key voters like that? Republicans, swing voters.
Sure.
Now, this is also, by the way, so he often says this, sure. So, which basically, which words he says, yes, I'm going to answer your question. Yes, I'm willing. So it's also psychological, right? It's, although for him, it's also one of these words that he repeats over and over again. You often hear it from sure, whereas like, Donald Trump often says frankly, or, um, like Joe Biden, as there's always, oh, look. They have these certain things that they you see this coming back, and these are habits. So to some degree, but so to some degree, you could argue it is an agreeableness here. He wants to say, I'm agreeing with talking to you. I'm willing to answer difficult questions.
Or put off by your views.
Well, what I would say, Dana, is if you look at what I said in context, the Harris campaign has frankly lied about what I actually said. I'm pro-family. I want us to have more families, and obviously sometimes it doesn't work out, sometimes for medical reasons, sometimes because you don't meet the right person. But the point is that our country has become anti-family in its public policy. Let me just give you an example of this. So after our second child was born, my wife and I, we have 3 little kids. After our second child was born, we get the baby home from the hospital. We get this ridiculous out-of-network medical bill that is financially shocking, and we're pretty well off. And that happened because we have ridiculous laws in this country that are anti-family. I've sponsored legislation to try to fix things like that so moms and dads don't get these surprise medical bills. I think it's important for us to be pro-family. That's all that I've ever said.
If you want to be pro-family, I want to, because you do criticize, as you just did, the Democratic Party for being anti-family.
I do.
You called out Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg in particular. Kamala Harris has 2 stepchildren. Pete Buttigieg and his husband have adopted twins. Do you recognize them as parents and more broadly as being part of families?
Well, of course I do, Dana. I mean, you know my life story. I was actually raised. I was raised, but Dana, I was raised. I mean, one of the first people that I gave a hug to after my RNC convention speech was my stepmom, who's been an incredibly important person in my life.
So she's not childless.
My kids call her Mamaw. Of course she's not childless, but
Now, of course, she's not childless. So what actually, he has to make the best of this, right? So he has been severely criticized. He's unhappy, I guess, that sort of like came out. He regrets probably that he has ever said this, and he takes his opportunity here to come up with an example of how he embraced his stepmom and so on. So does he do that well here? Yeah, I guess it's the best he can make from this, and how else could he do that? So I think it is sort of like a reasonable approach that he takes here.
You called her that.
The criticism, I certainly did not call my own stepmother childless.
Kamala Harris.
I criticized Kamala Harris for being part of a set of ideas that exists in American leadership that is anti-family. I never, Dana, criticized people for not having kids. I criticized people for being anti-child. And I do think that Kamala Harris has made some bizarre...
To accuse your opponent about, say, you're anti-child, it's almost, I would say it's almost laughable to make such an argument. And in a way, that's what we're discussing here in this interview, whether people are against children, which is, in a way, it's fascinating that it has come to that point. And of course, it is his own fault that he's being asked about that. And
She has said things like it's reasonable not to have children over climate change. I think that's the exact opposite message we should be sending to our young families. I want to expand the child tax credit. I want to stop those surprise medical bills. I want to make housing more affordable so that if you have a young family, you can actually afford to put them in a home. And I think that it is unfortunate that so much of our public leadership has become anti-family. One final point on this, Dana, if you go back to the COVID era, one thing that really frustrated me and motivated some of these comments is we were at a point where we were kicking kids out of school.
Now he tries to sort of like say, well, look, during the lockdown, kids were not treated well, and that's a fair, I think you can spin that argument in different ways, as she also says. So, but he is trying to get away from the original point. Do you believe that Harris is anti-child? And I think it's it's a difficult thing to
We
do.
were masking 3-year-olds and putting the masks back on them, even as they were trying to rip them off at school.
But was that anti-child or was that to protect children?
I think that if we had more people who took the right perspective and had a little bit more understanding of how little kids actually operate, we would not have made so many of those mistakes during COVID.
That's a whole nother conversation because
No, it's related to this
because
because
people
you
didn't know as much because it was
but
literally a novel
sure,
virus.
but Danny, you
And there she makes the right point, right? So she even says, she says what I said is just what I just said. I mean that, it's a different discussion, right? And I think people don't want to talk about COVID anymore. It's in the past. It's something that's not right here and right now. So psychologically, I would say he can't win much there. And I think a cleverer response would have been to say this, like he could have said like, look, I made those comments, but in no moment I don't doubt that she loves her stepchildren. He didn't respond directly to this. Do you believe that Harris is anti-child? He just should have said, no, I don't believe that. Actually, I think but what I actually meant to say, and didn't come out so well. That can, because then you can move on. Then you have freed yourself in the argument, and then you have space to move on to something that you want to talk about and that you feel comfortable about that, because that comes up later, but relatively late in the interview.
asked me about okay, you've now asked me 3 questions about
Now he's going in attack mode.
comments that I made 3 years ago.
Uh-huh.
I wonder what Kamala Harris thinks about the fact that she supported policies that open the American southern border. I wonder what Kamala Harris thinks about the fact that she lied to the American people
interviewing you, not Kamala
about Joe
Harris.
Biden's mental.
So you see, you see his hand movements are going to be different now, because he is, and you see sometimes that politicians do this, and I always think, I would say you have two types of politicians. You have politicians who you have politicians who answer questions, and you have sometimes politicians who go against the interviewer, who go sort of like attack the interviewer. And I always think it's not a clever thing to do, like, because you are being interviewed, so you sit in this situation and you have to deal with the questions. Don't my tip for anyone who is interviewed at this level would be to say, well, never attack the person who asked the questions. But he is now sort of like going against her, so, which also shows that he is upset. He is upset, and also we are now relatively, we have now had most of the interview. So he's probably now feeling more comfortable than in the beginning, warming up, and he feels he can counter something that he doesn't. He says, "You have asked me 3 questions now about this," and he doesn't like that.
Middle facility for the office. You are interviewing me, Dana, because I respect the American people enough to sit down for an interview.
I appreciate that.
Kamala Harris has been the nominee for 3 weeks. She hasn't sat down for a real
Believe
interview.
me, we are asking. You're not going to get a disagreement there.
But the point is, Dana, you've got me for 15 minutes or however long you have me. We should be talking about public policies that matter. How are we going to lower inflation? How are we going to reduce the cost of food and housing? How are we going to close down that southern border? We've talked so little about that. We've talked a lot more about a sarcastic remark I made 3 years ago. I think we should talk about the issues that most Americans care about.
I only asked you one question about that. I asked you about policies, and I was asking about the military record that you brought up. Nobody else did, of Tim Walz.
Now here she sets the record straight, right? So he has attacked her, and she says, "No, listen, this is the situation of the interview. I'm here in charge. I know what I'm doing, so I'm the expert, and she does it really good actually. And let's see on how that goes on then. So let's continue uh, with the interview.
One last question. This is on.
And now he again, see, and I find that interesting actually. After she said that, he put up this smiling face again, and it says to me. So I think what we see here is sort of like he knows she is right, and I think that he goes a little bit, oh yeah, he realizes that probably, oh yeah, I probably shouldn't have said that, and he goes like in this smiling persona that like it's this smiling mask that he puts on to say, oh yeah, okay, here I am, the the person that I want you to perceive me as, namely as smiling JD Vance. Very interesting, very interesting. That's a fascinating psychological aspect.
Policy.
Please.
The federal.
And then he says, please, right? So also, again, I mean, that's interesting that he says this, please. Again, his agreeableness with here to continue. These are small things. Normally you wouldn't pick it up, but I think at like a psychological level, you need to pick up this sort of like small communication signals that you have between the two people and how they respond and so like look at these facial features here.
Reserve.
Yeah.
Donald Trump said this week that he feels strongly that the president should have at least a say when it comes to the Federal Reserve and how to handle interest rates. Do you agree that a president should direct the Federal Reserve on how to handle interest rates?
Well, not direct. That's not what he said. He said the president should have a say, but one, I absolutely agree with what he said.
Right now,
And
the president
two,
doesn't have a say.
Well, the president has a say in the sense that the president appoints the Federal
Right.
Reserve governors, but he's saying, to be clear, President Trump is saying, I think, something that's really important and actually profound, which is that the political leadership of this country should have more say over the monetary policy of this country. I agree with him. That should fundamentally be a political decision. Agree or disagree, we should have America's elected leaders having input about the most important decisions confronting our country.
That would
The
be a
question to
huge
go-
change, just so people understand
It
that.
would be a huge change, but whether the country goes to war, what our interest rates are, these are important questions that American democracy should have important answers for. And I think all President Trump is saying is that, look, it's kind of weird that you have so many bureaucrats making so many important decisions. If the American people don't like our interest rate policy, they should elect somebody different to change that policy. Nothing should be above democratic debate in this country when it comes to the big questions confronting the United States.
Okay, one last question.
Please.
Now, I think what we saw there was this was something where he was in his comfort zone. And you saw that the response to it was very different than to the question about abortion, where he could have said, well, this is what our policy and it's really important, blah blah blah. But he didn't. He said, no, actually, the states, right? But here, this is something where he feels strong about, and where he, made many hand gestures and so on to sort of like, talk with what he was saying. So I think he was really feeling confident about what he was saying. It was probably also something that he clearly had thought about.
And I can't believe I have to ask you this, but I do, because
Now, this is interesting. I can't believe I have to ask you this, but I have to do. So what is this? And he's laughing. He's laughing about that. I think, and hands clenched. I think he's nervous actually because he doesn't know what's coming. So what's coming?
Donald Trump has been attacking Kamala Harris's racial identity.
He has not been, but
And then he immediately goes, no, he has not been. Head down, and so like, no, he has not been. Of course, I mean, what happened in that interview, if you have seen that didn't go well for Trump.
So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
She has always
But you know
identified
what?
as a black woman.
I
She went to a
respect
historically
either
black
one.
college.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn and she became a black person.
Just to be clear, sir, do
And
you
I
believe
think,
that
I think
she is
somebody should look into that too when you continue in a very hostile, nasty tone.
it's a
Whatever you think about that, I think that Trump didn't gain anything, from the comments that he made, because he's in those sort of strange situations, he's often, I would say, not diplomatic, um, as as many politicians actually are. So the things that Trump would say, and I think that's why Trump gets a lot of attention, the things that Trump would say, nobody else would ever say, even if they would think it. So now he first goes in defense mode. He has to, because of course he is the running mate and he has to defend Trump. But let's see what he
Ask
says.
your question.
Well, he questioned her racial identity. He said a number of years ago she happened to turn black. Her father is Jamaican. Do you believe Kamala Harris is black?
Now, this is a really good question, of course. Obviously, given that her father, uh, is Jamaican, obviously she can call herself black. Uh, there is, and that's good. I think what the interviewer does here, she sets up the question so that there's only one possible answer that you can give here, right? So he has to say, yes, of course, I agree. And that's actually interesting as well that she does that. I think she is a good interviewer. She has prepared these questions really well. He laughs, right? So it's this laughter response, which basically means, oh, don't take this seriously. I don't want to really talk about it. This is just laughable. This is not so important.
I believe
See, it's it's just a joke. It's not so
that
important.
Kamala Harris is whatever she says she is, but I believe importantly that President Trump is right that she's a chameleon. She
Now and then he goes, yes, but so he basically changes changes a little bit from the basic question. So what is she? What is the right way to describe her? Well, he said already, well, she can describe her whatever she wants. So sort of like he agrees with that, but then he sort of like tweaks it, right? But there is something specific that he wants to talk about. And from purely from an argumentation point of view, that is probably, yeah, that's one way to do it. So he could have, ultimately, there are different ways you can argue about this, right? So you can say, well, if this is just a debate, say at a student society or something like that, then okay, that's one thing. But here, don't forget, it's it's not just about what he thinks. It is what he says, how that actually is perceived by the audience of voters who have not yet decided. Now, from my point of view, I would argue that given that what Trump did was not a good way to convince undecided voters in any way, and possibly, actually something that voters might say, actually, you wait a minute. I mean, I just don't want to vote for somebody who goes in these sort of like discussions, who or somebody who's so undiplomatic. So what Vance could do here, he could think of, okay, I need to say something that is going to convince the undecided voter. So what he could do here, if he would be, I would say, if I would be in that situation, I would think, okay, I could be the running mate who is the sensible person, right?
pretends to be one thing in front of one audience. She pretends to be something different in front of another audience. Look, Dana, she's not running a political campaign. She's running a movie. She only speaks to voters behind a teleprompter. Everything is scripted. She doesn't have her policy positions out there. She hasn't answered why she wanted to ban fracking, but now she doesn't. She wanted to fund police, but now she doesn't. She wanted to open the border, but now she doesn't. She should have to answer for why she presents a different set of policies to one audience and a different set of policies to another audience. And I think that's what President Trump is getting at. This is a fundamentally fake person. She's different depending on who she's in front of.
Now, interestingly, I've said it before. I think the strategies of argumentation in these sort of debates is often very similar, and it doesn't matter which party you have. The idea, I remember this. I think this was when John Kerry was running against George W. Bush many years ago. I think where this idea of the flip flopper comes up. Somebody is a flip flopper, which means that they change position all the time. And you see that also in other countries where people will is yeah, well, one time you said this and another time you say that.
With respect, you
Please.
changed your position on an important thing, which is Donald Trump.
Of course I did.
You-
and
and so
I'm
why are
honest
you not a
about it.
chameleon?
Because, Dana, I've explained to the American people what's different. People change their minds when the facts change, they should. But if you want to be the people's vice president or president, you should have to stand before an interviewer and say, this is why I changed my mind. So to everybody who's seen that I criticized Donald Trump, since he asked the question, here are two things.
You didn't just criticize him, you said he could be America's Hitler.
Well, that's
Now, so this is interesting. So, and here I think psychologically he is not convincing anymore because he has so obviously changed his own mind about Trump, and now he has sort of like a whole argument about why that is. And I think in principle, the argument is sort of like logical if you think really deeply probably about it. But at the surface, it just looks like that he's doing the same. And therefore, the argument that he likes to make falls apart at a psychological level and it just doesn't work.
a criticism, and I didn't say that exactly, but set that to the side. What I said about Donald Trump and what I believed about Donald Trump, two things that really changed. First of all, I didn't think Donald Trump would be a good president. He was a great president. Wages were rising. The world was more peaceful. Remember, when Donald Trump was running for president the first time, they said he would start World War III. He brought more peace to the world than any president of my lifetime. The second thing, Dana, is I believed, and I'm ashamed of it, I believed a lot of the media lies about Donald Trump in 2016. I believe that he said things like, for example, the media said Donald Trump accused all Mexicans of being rapists and criminals. You actually look at what he said, he did not say that at all. And I think it's important when you see something, you change your mind, and that's all I've done. And my pitch to the American people would be, I imagine a lot of folks who are thinking about voting for Donald Trump in 2024, maybe they've bought in to the media lies about him. Think for yourself, look at what he actually said, and I think you'll find that he's, one, a very engaging guy, but two, was a very good president.
There aren't media lies. We play him and we let him speak for himself, and so people are getting exactly.
I'm not
And then she's correcting him, right? So she's correcting him. She says, well, these are not media lies. She is the media, right? So she's representative of the media. And then see what happens. His hand shoots forward, and his face is sort of like, I would say, argumentative, right? So he becomes argumentative. So what is he saying?
accusing you of
No,
lying,
I know,
Dana.
I
You know
know.
I lie.
Ah, he says, I'm not excused. So he goes forward. So it is an agreeable disagreement in a way. He says, well, I'm not accusing you, right? But he goes forward to really stress that, right? So he puts his hand out there.
No,
The
I know
media
you're not.
lies from time to
I know
time
you're
about
not, but
Donald Trump.
people hear him for himself. Last question.
Please.
Are you going to debate Tim Walz?
Of course. I want to debate Tim Walz. I think it's important, and I think that it goes to a very fundamental difference between the Trump-Vance ticket and our opposition. We believe in talking to the media. We believe in answering questions. We believe in debating. I think it's really important. I mean, look, I'm asking the American people to make me their vice president. It's really important to stand before the American people to make that case, and I'm going to keep on doing it in whatever forum I get the opportunity. So
We look
thank
forward
you.
to it. Thank you so much
Thanks,
for
Dana.
sitting down and taking my
Of
questions.
course.
I
Thank you for
appreciate
coming
it.
here.
So, well, that was it. I hope you found this interesting. I will certainly come back on this. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you like this type of content. And see you next time.